Today I would like to invite you to listen to the Dhammapada of the Buddha Shakyamuni, the 99th verse from the Buddhist scriptures on the YouTube channel THại I in the USA. Delightful are the forests where worldlings delight not. The passionless will rejoice therein, for they seek no sensual pleasures. As we settle into the gentle presence of this teaching, let us allow the heart to become calm and open. Let the words of the Blessed One flow into us like a cool stream running through a quiet valley. This verse is an invitation to look deeply into what the Buddha called true delight. Not the delight that comes from fleeting pleasures or loud amusements of the world, but the delight that rises quietly, naturally, and purely from a mind that has been freed from craving. When the Buddha speaks of forests as delightful, he is not referring only to a physical place with trees and mountains. He is speaking of the inner forest, the silent refuge inside our own hearts. It is that sacred place where the noisy activities of desire and attachment cannot enter. The worldling does not delight in this place because the worldling still depends on the senses for satisfaction. Yet to the passionless, to those who have begun to release the bonds of craving, the forest is profoundly joyful. According to the Dhammapada commentary, this verse was spoken in connection with Venerable Theravada, the younger brother of the great Sariputta. It is said that Ravada chose the solitude of the forest as his refuge, while others preferred the warmth of village life, the security of companionship, and the noise of worldly comforts. Ravada found his joy in the deep stillness of the wilderness. When people asked the Buddha why Ravada did not enjoy the bustle of the world, the Buddha answered with this verse. The forest may appear desolate to those who seek stimulation, but to the one whose mind has grown peaceful, the forest is a sanctuary of freedom. In this way, the Buddha reminded us that joy does not depend on the outer world. It arises from the mind's inner purity. It is not the forest itself that is sacred, but the clarity of heart that knows how to dwell there without fear and without desire. This verse guides us gently to consider the nature of our own happiness. The world teaches us from childhood to seek delight through sights, sounds, tastes, touches, and thoughts. It encourages us to chase after recognition, status, entertainment, and approval. It offers us pleasure in many forms, but the pleasure is unstable. It fades quickly, leaving behind longing and disappointment. The Buddha, however, showed another path. He showed the path where joy is not dependent on circumstances. It is the joy of renunciation, the joy of simplicity, the joy of stillness. When the heart becomes free from the pushing and pulling of desire, everything becomes peaceful. Even a quiet forest becomes a paradise. Even the simple sound of wind passing through leaves becomes music for the awakened heart. In this verse, the Buddha is not praising nature as an escape. He is praising the inner quality of freedom. That makes even a simple environment radiant. When we are still bound by passion, we look for stimulation. We want something to excite us, something to entertain us, something to distract us. But when passion falls away, the heart begins to rejoice in calmness. It discovers contentment in serenity. It no longer seeks noise because noise only disturbs its peace. This is why the Buddha said, "The forest is delightful for the passionless." The forest symbolizes the place where thoughts grow gentle, where emotions soften, where the winds of craving die down, and where the light of insight begins to shine. For the worldly mind, silence feels like a void. For the awakened mind, silence is full of truth. The story of Venerable Ravada beautifully illustrates the meaning of this verse. He was born into a respected family. He had comfort, material support, and affection. Yet he saw the impermanence of worldly life. He watched the mind's restless movements. He saw how attachments bind beings to the endless cycles of joy and sorrow. Out of compassion for himself and others, he walked into the forest, not as an escape, but as a step toward clarity. when he lived in solitude. Surrounded by trees, birds, and open sky, he saw the workings of his own mind with great sharpness. The peace of the forest did not create wisdom, but it allowed wisdom to unfold. When the Buddha praised the delightful nature of the forest, he was praising the joy of renunciation, a joy that does not depend on having more, but on needing less, a joy that arises naturally when the heart becomes quiet enough to see truth. This verse also teaches us that the delight experienced by the passionless is not something magical or extraordinary. It is simply the natural result of understanding the Four Noble Truths. When we understand suffering, when we see how craving gives rise to suffering, when we learn the path to end craving, the heart begins to loosen. This loosening brings peace. Peace brings joy. Joy brings clarity. And clarity brings liberation. The forest is delightful because the mind resting in insight is delightful. The forest is peaceful because the mind resting in non-attachment is peaceful. In this way, the Buddha uses the physical image of the forest to guide us into the inner landscape of liberation. Let us reflect on this. Teaching with gentleness. When we quiet our mind, even briefly, we begin to taste a drop of the joy the Buddha described. When we loosen our grasping even slightly, we experience a hint of the freedom praised in this verse. We do not need to renounce the world entirely to taste this joy. We simply need to create little forests within our lives. Moments of silence. Moments of mindfulness. Moments where desire is allowed to rest. In those moments, we begin to understand why the Buddha said the forest is delightful. It is delightful because the mind, once freed from craving, finds solitude is not about physical isolation. Solitude is the freedom from the disturbances of craving and clinging. Solitude is the moment when the heart rests in itself without running after the world or running away from anything. When the Buddha spoke about the delight of the forest, he was speaking both literally and symbolically. The forest is a place where the mind meets itself. It is a place where it becomes possible to listen clearly to the Dharma that has always been present within the heart. When we reflect on the story of Venerable Ravada, we see that the forest is not simply a place of trees and animals. It is a sanctuary where the noise of desire cannot reach. Ravada entered the forest not because he disliked people, but because his heart naturally gravitated toward peace. The Buddha recognized in him a sincere seeker of liberation, and therefore, the verse was spoken to illuminate the beauty of inner renunciation. The worldling seeks to fill the mind with objects, sensations, and distractions. When the senses are untrained, when the heart is not steady, the mind becomes like a restless monkey. It jumps from thought to thought, from desire to desire. The world encourages this restlessness. It rewards it with temporary pleasure. It tells us that happiness comes from obtaining more, from experiencing more, from becoming more. Yet those who walk the path of the Buddha begin to see that this outward movement prevents us from touching true peace. The more we chase, the more we feel incomplete. The more we cling, the more we fear loss. The more we depend on the senses, the more unstable our happiness becomes. This is why the Buddha taught that true joy arises not from the stimulation of the senses, but from the calming of the senses. In the forest, the passionless person rejoices because there is nothing there to excite craving. There is only the quiet sound of wind, the soft rhythm of nature, the gentle presence of life unfolding without struggle. This simplicity nourishes the mind that has learned to appreciate inner peace. Ravada understood this. He realized that the deeper his mind sank into solitude, the clearer the Dharma became. In the presence of silence, illusions fall away. In the presence of space, the grasping habits loosen. In the presence of simplicity, wisdom rises like the sun after a long night. The forest does not make a person enlightened, but it supports the conditions for enlightenment to unfold. We can learn from this by creating moments of forest within our own lives. Even if we live in cities or busy households, we can find moments where the mind can step away from noise. These moments can be created through meditation, through mindful breathing, through quiet reflection, or through simple acts of mindful living. When we drink tea without distraction, when we observe the breath with awareness, when we look at a flower and see its impermanent beauty, we are stepping into the inner forest. This forest is always available. It does not depend on geography. It depends only on our willingness to rest in the present moment. The joy described in this verse is the joy of the unentangled heart. It is the joy that arises when craving no longer controls our thoughts. This joy is gentle. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not need to be displayed to others. It is like the fragrance of a flower that spreads without effort. A mind free from craving radiates a peace that influences all beings around it. This is why the presence of an arahant is always delightful. The verse applies not only to the forest as a location, but also to the presence of liberated beings. Just as the forest brings peace to those who appreciate silence, the arahant brings peace to those who appreciate the Dharma. The Buddha often praised the company of noble beings, saying that even a moment spent near them brings great benefit because their presence encourages the growth of wisdom. When we contemplate the life of Venerable Ravada, we see that he did not reject the world out of aversion. He simply understood that the world cannot give lasting happiness. His heart naturally turned toward the Dharma. When people visited him in the forest, they often found him radiant with serenity. They could feel his peace. They could feel his detachment. They could feel that his joy was not based on conditions. This kind of joy cannot be gained through material wealth or worldly success. It can only be found through inner transformation. That transformation begins when we see the unsatisfactory nature of clinging. Even the most pleasurable experiences eventually fade. Even the sweetest relationships are subject to change. Even the richest life is touched by aging, sickness, and death. When the mind sees this truth clearly, it begins to loosen its grip on the world. The forest is delightful to the passionless because the forest does not demand anything. It does not ask us to become someone. It does not pressure us to perform. It does not tempt us with endless desires. Instead, it offers us space to breathe, space to reflect, space to awaken. When we reduce the noise of the outer world, the inner world becomes visible. This is why the Buddha praised solitude as an essential part of practice. Not solitude from people, but solitude from clinging. Not solitude from life, but solitude from delusion. This is the meaning of the verse. When the heart is free, it delights in simplicity. It delights in enoughness. It delights in calmness. It delights in the Dharma. Even if the world cannot understand this kind of joy, it is real and profound. Ravada's life shows us that the deepest happiness is not found in the places that attract crowds. It is found in quiet moments, in mindful breathing, in gentle awareness, in the recognition of impermanence, and in the surrender of craving. This is the delight of the forest. This is the delight of liberation. In reflecting upon this verse, we begin to understand that the forest is not merely a destination but a state of heart. It is the inner quiet that becomes possible when the burdens of desire grow light. When the Buddha taught that the passionless rejoice where worldlings do not, he guided us to examine the roots of our own happiness. The worldling does not rejoice in the forest because the worldling depends upon movement, stimulation, entertainment, and satisfaction of the senses. When those elements are absent, the ordinary mind feels restless. It longs for distraction. It looks outward for comfort. Yet the mind that has tasted the sweetness of the Dharma finds comfort in stillness. It discovers nourishment in silence. It experiences freedom in simplicity. This freedom is the delight spoken of in the verse. It is the delight that arises when the heart is untouched by craving. Venerable Ravada's life reveals the depth of this teaching. It is said that he traveled far away from the places where worldly concerns gathered. He entered forests where few people ventured. While others might fear the unknown, he saw only the spaciousness needed for his practice. He found no loneliness there because his heart rested in the presence of the Buddha's wisdom. He felt no discomfort because his joy came from insight, not from external pleasures. The silence around him did not burden him. It became his companion. The trees did not frighten him. They stood as reminders of impermanence and strength. The wilderness did not confuse him. It revealed the truths of aging, decay, renewal, and interdependence. In this environment, his mind grew tranquil. His wisdom deepened. His delight in the Dharma shined clearly. When the Buddha praised the delight of the forest, he was also teaching us about the nature of true refuge. People search for refuge in many places. Some seek it in wealth. Some seek it in relationships. Some seek it in status. Some seek it in personal abilities. Yet these refuges are unstable. They depend on conditions that constantly change. The forest symbolizes the refuge that arises from inward clarity. A refuge not built on conditions. A refuge not dependent on praise or blame. A refuge not vulnerable to gain or loss. The passionless rejoice because their refuge is within the heart. They carry it everywhere. Even if they dwell in the world, their inner solitude remains unshaken. This verse invites us to examine what we truly seek. When we look honestly at our desires, we notice that many of them arise from restlessness rather than genuine need. We desire because we think it will bring happiness. We cling because we fear losing what we have. We chase because we hope fulfillment lies elsewhere. But the Buddha taught that true delight arises from understanding desire rather than feeding it. When we see the cycles of craving and its results, the mind naturally begins to turn toward calmness. It begins to appreciate peace. It begins to enjoy the simple contentment of the present moment. This is the joy of the passionless. It is not a forced joy. It is not a joy that needs protecting. It is the natural radiance of a mind that is no longer burdened. To walk this path, we do not need to abandon our homes or enter the deep wilderness. We only need to cultivate awareness. Awareness is the beginning of the inner forest. When we practice mindful breathing, we notice the difference between restlessness and peace. When we observe our thoughts, we see how desire pushes us. When we watch the rise and fall of emotions, we understand their impermanent nature. These simple practices create small openings in the mind. Through those openings, light enters. Through that light, clarity arises. And through that clarity, we begin to taste the joy that the Buddha described. The passionless are not those who suppress their desires, but those who understand them deeply. Understanding dissolves craving the way sunlight dissolves mist. The joy that arises from freedom is gentle and steady. It does not depend on outer comfort. It does not need entertainment. It does not require approval. It simply exists because the mind is no longer trapped. Even if the body is in the world, the heart rests in silence. This is the forest within. This is the sacred space where the passionless find delight. Venerable Ravada showed through his example that solitude is not emptiness. Solitude is fullness. It is fullness of clarity, fullness of mindfulness, fullness of insight, fullness of compassion. When he walked beneath the trees, he carried no burden of self. When he sat in meditation, he followed the breath as it rose and fell. When he listened to the sounds of nature, he reflected on the impermanence in all things. His delight was not based on possessions. It was based on the freedom of the heart. The Buddha praised him not to encourage everyone to live in forests, but to encourage everyone to cultivate the mind that can rejoice in solitude. The verse teaches us that when passion fades, the heart becomes sensitive to a deeper joy. It begins to appreciate the stillness between breaths. It begins to cherish the quiet moments of the day. It begins to find beauty in humility. It begins to find peace in letting go. This joy cannot be purchased. It cannot be forced. It grows naturally when the mind understands the nature of desire. When craving weakens, a vast inner space opens. This space is the forest. It is delightful. It is peaceful. It is pure. It is always available. All we need is mindfulness to enter it. Through this teaching, the Buddha offers us a path of gentle liberation. Not a dramatic escape, not a sudden transformation, but a slow, steady release from the chains of attachment. As these chains break, one by one, the heart becomes light. It begins to rejoice in the simplest things. It finds delight in being free. The forest becomes a symbol of that freedom. The passionless find joy there because they seek nothing from it. They simply dwell in peace. This is the meaning of the verse. This is the heart of the Dharma. Thank you for watching my video. Namalammitpa. I wish to bring this merit towards all disciples and sentient beings, all of whom will attain Buddhahood. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate your time.